growing up, JD Graffam worked for McDonald's. Yeah, the Golden Arches. But what did he learn from that now, several years later, he can learn for his agency, Simple Focus? It's episode 83 of the 1004 show. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching. This has been a lot of fun interviewing JD because, he's really been able to be successful with this business. He's been able to buy other apps with his business, run those. And we talk about all of the businesses that he has, the process that he's been creating and actually leveraging from relationships or previous jobs that he had with other businesses. What's involved in talking through an elevator pitch. So many people say, what's your elevator pitch? So his business is actually currently going through that right now. And I asked basically, well, what are the elements that are necessary to be in there? We go over that and how to articulate your goals before you even start a business or a website. It's episode 83 with Simple Focus's own JD Graffam. Get your popcorn ready, folks. Spin that 1004 show logo. Bam!
What is marketing to you? How do you define that?
I used to have a hard time defining it, I guess. But these days, I'm actually beginning to wrap my head around it. I never thought of my company as Simple Focus as being a marketing agency, and I never really learned the fundamentals of marketing. But I think what it is now that I'm beginning to understand it is it's the idea that what you design or write and put in front of a customer needs to be put in front of the right customer, potential customer, and clearly articulate what you're selling and why they should buy it.
That's not necessarily an easy thing to do. I mean, you just say it yourself. It took you years to figure out that concept. Was there an aha moment when you started kind of articulating it as well as you just did, or what kind of brought you to that moment?
Well, a long time ago, back in about 2008 or so, I met a guy named Bob O'Connor, and he used to run an agency in Memphis where we're located. And Bob's kind of cut from his own cloth, but I learned about his career history, and he was trained and started his career at Procter and Gamble. And turns out that anybody that goes through P&G, they're sort of famous for teaching marketing and the fundamentals of marketing. And Bob had me design a website for him, and he wrote all the content, and he was able through his website to just really boil down to the essentials what marketing is, which is what he does as a marketing consultant. And it took years of just being familiar with what he was saying to slowly over time understand how true these simple statements about what the fundamentals of marketing are could actually be. If anybody's interested, his website is okpi.com. And it's kind of funny, okpi.com. Yeah.
A 4-letter domain, that's a hard thing to get. So good for him.
Well, he got it. He probably got it back in the 30s or something.
That's fine. What got you into business when you first started, many years ago?
Well, it sort of, I've always had this entrepreneurial mindset. I guess you could go all the way back to when I was about 12, and I wanted this Houston Astros starter jacket really bad. And it was about $119 or something like that. And I just literally walked around the neighborhood I lived in and knocked on people's doors and asked them if they would let me rake their yards for $20. And I raked enough yards and got enough blisters to earn that starter jacket. And then in college, there was a point, even before college, there was a point when I just had multiple jobs because I always wanted to be earning money so that I could buy the nice things that I wanted that were, over and above what my family provided for me, my parents, you know. So there was one summer when I would wake up and go work at McDonald's from 4:45 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then work at the grocery store from 1:30 to 7, and then go work at the fireworks stand from 7:30 until the next morning when I went up to McDonald's, because I was a night watchman and I was literally working 24 hours a day, earning, $7, $8, $10 an hour. Then in college, it was always, how can I get some extra beer money or whatever? And at some point, I learned how to do graphic design, and it went from having jobs to earn money through internships and working at Abercrombie and Fitch and repossessing cars to all of a sudden somebody was like, "Hey, so you can do graphic design on the computer?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, can you design some street signs for me? Green signs with white letters." And I was like, "That's a thing you can do for money?" Absolutely. Somebody has to typeset street signs, don't they? So I typeset street signs for $10 an hour, and that was sort of my first introduction into freelancing and getting paid in cash. The rest is history from there.
It's interesting. I remember having that starter jacket myself. I think my parents bought it for me. But I remember wanting it for so long that it was like the only Christmas present that I got. I was a big Miami Hurricane fan growing up, and so mine was that.
To hear that.
What's your team of choice?
Well, my starter jacket was the Houston Astros.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was a good year for them now, I guess.
Yeah, they're my favorite team. So I've gone and screwed up your podcast. I'm going to try and unplug this phone so it doesn't ring again. Okay.
Hey, that's business calling.
But when you interview JD, it's all about having the sound right.
You sound great.
Yeah. Okay, we're good. All right. Sorry, listeners.
You're fine. I'll edit it out.
Or leave it in.
Maybe I will. What did you learn from the McDonald's, working at McDonald's from a process perspective? Because I think one thing that people will complain a lot about big businesses, but not as a business owner themselves or someone that works on a team, is those big businesses have really, for the most part, figured out process. And did you take anything from that McDonald's and then start, using it in your own business?
That's interesting. I'm beginning to use some of those things in my business as we get bigger and need them. From a process perspective, at Simple Focus, when we were less than 10 people, you could sort of count on people, handling their business and not needing to be overly managed. And then when you get over 10 people in an agency, you need to start introducing, layers of redundancy. You need to start thinking about training. You need to start thinking about the fact that you can't, as the owner or CEO or manager, give every new hire the same amount of attention you give the first 5 or 6 hires. One of the things that I look back on as you asked this question, and I wasn't really prepared to think through it, but that occurs to me is that at McDonald's, I was 15 years old, and I showed up at 4:45 in the morning one day, and by 8 or 9 o'clock, I was being, probably sooner than that, I was being productive. And they had, systems and things in place to onboard new employees and teach them, how to be productive right away. Within 2 weeks, and this isn't really about me so much, but within 2 weeks, I was training people, right? And that just goes to show how well they simplified the process and made the process teachable and learnable. And I think that is something that is a really good insight that is something we're working on now as Simple Focus is, blowing through 20 employees, is that process is important to making sure that consistency is always there, because you can have a bunch of really talented people, and we do, but without the process and infrastructure to support these people and not just developing and getting better, but to keep them on course, on track, on time, and continually improving. It's really important to actually being able to make that work. Without it, it'll fall apart at the seams.
Well, and I think these companies have these guides, these templates that you can kind of, just if you've worked there or have just been a customer at these places, that you can start using for your own business, whether it's process, whether it's marketing. And even if your business doesn't have a lot of money and can't afford some of these big things, you can start kind of leveraging what a big business is doing because they've incubated those ideas already. Now you can just kind of execute them. And it's interesting that you guys are starting to do that now. In a sentence or two, give me your elevator pitch on Simple Focus.
Okay, before I give you the sentence or two, I should articulate that we're actually thinking through that right now. And I have my opinions, and the rest of the team has their opinions. And we're not that far apart, but there is nuance to it. I think one thing that we all agree on, and I'll say it like this, is that Simple Focus is a team of user interface experts, whether that's marketing, websites, or app design. One of the things we're really good at is UI design. So usability, user experience, and making things that are not just elegant and beautiful, but also very functional and easy to use.
So when you guys are talking as a team, or the people that you're talking about through this process, what are kind of the elements that you're looking for in an elevator pitch?
I'm not sure I'm following you.
So you said you're talking this through with your team right now, and you guys.
Okay, yeah.
So what are the items or things that you're kind of saying we need to make sure this is in our elevator pitch to make sure that you guys are all on the same page and not only internally but also externally?
Two things really. I think number one is, what are our values? Like, what is it that we stand for and why do we exist? The second thing is like who we are and what we do. Like, what is it that we do, right? Why are we special? Why do we exist? What do we believe? These are all the important things. And then from there, you can spin it into something that's maybe customer friendly.
Why are values important for a company?
Well, I think they're certainly important for us now. It's something that's we've experienced growing from 4 to 10 to 20 person company. The values were sort of ever present because everybody was in one small room together, and we kind of heard everything everybody said to everybody and to customers. But now with different roles in a team of 20 people in 3 offices, not everybody gets to sit in on JD's calls with customers when he's selling websites, or Matt's calls with customers when he's selling websites. And all of a sudden you begin to realize that the developers and the designers have become their own teams, and it's important to get everybody communicating on the same page, because not everybody joins the team at the same time, at the same point in the growth. And so not only do the values adapt and adjust over time, but so do your specialties. And I think that with 20 people in 3 offices, just makes common sense that it's harder to let that happen organically, and you have to be real deliberate about it.
How do you relate those conversations or those correspondence when you're on those sales calls or you're talking with your customers to then talk to the team who's actually going to develop it?
That's a good question, and it comes down to process. I think we've got some documents that we like to create, but even before we start creating those documents, I'm making a point to make sure that the customer knows that in the early meetings with me and Matt or Patrick or whoever is doing the front ending of the relationship, that the customer understands that one of the things we're going to do is make you repeat all the stuff that you're telling us with the whole team in the room. We're a design agency too, so I believe very deep down that designers belong as early in the process with the business as possible. And so when we do a kickoff with a customer, to get everybody in the same room and communicating and hearing from the customer about who they are and what they stand for and what they believe in and what they want out of the project before we create the creative brief, I think it's important to have everybody there listening, whether it's the developer, the designer, the creative director, the copywriters, everybody that's going to be on the project. So our kickoffs often have 7 or 8 people in the room rather than just a couple of leadership people, and that serves 2 purposes. One, it means that the leadership or the sales team has less work to do in terms of trying to translate everything into to the team from the client. But also the better part is that the team actually gets to interpret it for themselves because they're all naturally problem solvers and they're good at that. And then when you have, a copywriter and designer and developer hearing a client say the same thing, they're listening for different aspects. And so they're actually hearing more of what the client is saying, even though all 3 of them heard the exact same words. They're hearing it from their perspective and what they're going to have to do. So, it makes the end result better, I think, that way.
Does everyone need a mobile app? Does every business need a mobile application?
No. That's a terrible question. Of course they don't.
I mean, but why do businesses,
no.
A lot of businesses think they do. I think it is a terrible question too, but I think it's the business thinking that they need it or that thing is going to put them over the hump. So what type of business needs an app? How does a business figure out that process that it might be a good fit for them?
I don't know. I mean, you gotta think about how expensive it is to create an app. First of all, if you've got a service or a product that can be delivered through an app that makes sense, then absolutely. But it's got to make financial sense too. Apps aren't cheap. They take a lot of work. I even run several software companies in addition to Simple Focus, and none of them have apps. I mean, one of them used to have an app, and we decided to shut the app down because it wasn't worth it to maintain it. Now, when the revenue gets to where it needs to be, and we have enough customers demanding it, and we're missing out on too many opportunities because we don't have an app for our time tracking company, then absolutely we will build an app. But until we actually need it, it doesn't make sense for us to invest in it. And we're like right there in a space where you would assume that we might have just assume we need apps, but I don't know why my CPA would need an app or a restaurant will need an app. But it depends on the business. But yeah, I don't know. I don't. Yeah. So I do have this story about this that's kind of crazy. So there's this company in Memphis that you may have heard of called FedEx, and this guy that used to work in the innovation team at FedEx said that they would get project requests from different business units asking the innovation team to build them an app because they thought that's what innovation was. And my friend just sort of laughed and said, "That's like building an app is not innovative, right? That's not what innovation is. It's just app building is what it is."
Yeah, I just think that, maybe not as much as, in years past, but definitely in years past, everyone wanted an app. Everyone thought they could become the next Facebook. And it was just an interesting time of life to be in, and people didn't even know what the app's, main feature was.
Yeah.
So
what is... Well, I talked to a software company, actually a medical company today, about their service, and they've built this dashboard for folks, and they've spent over $3 million building this dashboard. And frankly, they could get 95% of the value of the dashboard by just typing up something and putting it in a PDF and giving it to the customer or to the patient, right? They're not at the scale that they need this all to be automated. They could just type it up, send it to the patient as a PDF, and give the patient 95% in most cases, sometimes even 100% of the same value with something that would take them 45 minutes, you know, and they've spent several $1,000,000 building those. Now, I'm not saying that they won't need that technology and that technology doesn't have inherent value in existing, but when they're busy trying to get a company off the ground and they're trying to prove whether or not the service they provide, which is actually the medical diagnosis and prevention and all that, you know, until they've proven the need for the automation, it seems wasteful.
What's your conversation then with that person? How do you respond, saying, "Hey, you know, I don't think I think you're doing this a different way"?
I told them they need to raise several more $1,000,000 and hire us.
How many million?
Several more.
Oh, several more. They said 71. I was like that.
No, I mean it wasn't my place in that conversation to be providing feedback. It wasn't a sales call or anything like this. This was somebody that was just asking for some guidance on how to approach investors, you know. And since they built the app, they've got, you know, some customers, so they're not in the position they were in. So they're not, you know, today, you know, that conversation was kind of about the past. But I think when someone asks me, you know, that's absolutely the feedback I would have given him. But he wasn't asking for that feedback. It was a different conversation. That was just something that I took away from it.
What is JD Graffam the best in the world at?
I tell you what, I want to be the best in the world at. I just want to be the best in the world at being a dad and a husband. You know, that's what it all comes down to for me. That's why I work, is so that I can go home. And, you know, I work because I enjoy creating and I enjoy the industry and all that. But that's what I want to be the best at. You know, I think that when I was designing, one of my strengths as a designer was in form design, as simple as that sounds. Just input in forms and thinking about the user experience and of data entry. I was pretty good at that. These days, I think that I'm good at helping people think through problems. You know, and that's a pretty abstract concept, but as a manager, business owner, it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It's not just problems with our work and process and workflow, but it's also, you know, either day in and day out of personnel issues, career development, and then sitting down with customers and having conversations, you know, about, you know, what they can be doing to, you know, move their business forward. I'm focused when I provide business advice on getting the cash flow positive, because maybe that's what I'm good at, is not so much scaling a business, but just finding ways to make a business profitable. So I don't know. That's several answers. Pick and choose.
Pick one guy. When you're walking through with someone about their problems, what are some of the questions that you're asking to try and figure out what their true problem is? Because I believe most people think it's one thing, but it's actually something completely different.
I have two questions. Why are you doing what you're doing, and why do you want to do what you want to do? And you just ask those questions different ways over and over again until they actually wake up and realize what's going on.
So are you not the best dad and husband in the world? And how do you track that, I guess?
You know, yeah, right. You know, I think you'd be hard pressed to get my wife to say that I'm not good at those things, and you'd be hard pressed to get me to say that she's not good at being a mother and a wife. So that's a good sign, right? But, you know, me personally, if there was some magical, you know, switch I could flip where I was home more, than, you know, if I didn't have to work. But, you know, at the same time, it's not something that that I think people who work need to make themselves feel guilty about. I think what you got to remember is that we're all whole people, and family is a very important part of our lives. Loved ones are a very important part of our lives, but they're not the entirety of who we are, right? So I've got to spend time taking care of my body physically and working out, and that takes time away from the family, but without that, I'm not healthy and I'm not whole. I've got to find opportunities to stimulate myself socially and professionally, and that requires being out of the house, away from the kids, and away from my wife. So remembering not to like kick yourself for taking care of yourself is important. So I think when I said that what I want to be, the best at is being a husband and a father, I think the idea is that I want to be continually improving and continually better at it. I think that that's really, my life's work is to be remembered dearly, when it's all said and done, by those people who I love the most.
As a CEO of a business, how do you determine how much you pay yourself?
You pay yourself as much as you can afford.
Okay. That's a good answer.
Very unscientific, yeah. I made a joke with one of my business partners the other day that if my name is JD, let's take a draw, Graffam, and a draw, for those who are listening and they don't know, is just a shorthand for an owner's draw, which is how an owner typically compensates themselves in my, the way I've structured my businesses. That's a double-edged sword. So like there's how much money that I take out of the business is really dependent on cash flow and how much risk tolerance you have for how much operating capital you want to leave in the business and take out. You could just as easily ask the question, how much money do you put into the business? How do you determine how much money to put into the business? So that's one answer is just figuring out how much you're comfortable with taking out, right? And how much you're comfortable putting in. The other way to answer the question though is about, properly recording what your compensation should be on the books. And that's a more interesting question when you're thinking about the value of your business, because one of the things that's probably true is that I've got to adjust the books if I ever want to look at selling one of my companies and adjust my compensation to reflect what, my cost should actually be, right? Like what would it cost to replace JD? Well, probably less than what I pay myself. So then you got to figure out, well, what is the cost to pay JD? And you just got to think, okay, well, typically a business of this size would pay its CEO X dollars, right? And that's what it takes to, replace this GM. But there's a CPA firm who advises agency owners a good deal, and their rule of thumb is that if the owner of an agency is not paying himself or herself at least $150,000, then why do you own an agency? Why are you taking all that risk? Because you could probably make that, working for someone else and not having all the risk associated with it. So that's sort of the floor that a lot of digital agency owners who've gotten over 10 employees view.
150 or 115?
Yeah, 150. And that depends on the market you're in. It depends on a lot of other factors. But as a general rule of thumb, that's what they propose, is that if you're not at least taking 150 out of the business, that you probably shouldn't be doing it.
There was a Medium article that was pretty good that you wrote about Milestone 1. Can you kind of go over that process or that kind of concept of what Milestone 1 is?
Sure. Your listeners can go read the article for themselves. I encourage you to.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Cool. And I kind of want to give you the backstory behind where that came from. So I'm actually thinking about writing a book called Milestone 1. But more interesting than the book though is that I kind of think of Milestone One as being maybe a model for investment that's kind of reverse to the typical investor model. And I have put my money where my mouth is. And I'll share a little bit here, but I'll be writing more about my experience later. So rather than so this guy comes to me and says, you know, we agree that we want to start a company together and I'll invest. And so we decide how much I'm going to invest and what the equity needs to be. Generally, an investor will get what's called a preferred return to protect their initial cash investment. Now, this is my naive understanding of investment.
So preferred stock compared to common stock is what you're saying?
No, a preferred return.
Okay.
So preferred return would be like, you know, the investor gets their money back quicker than the sweat equity guy, right? That makes sure that the investor is more likely to be made whole, right? Okay, so it makes perfect logical sense if you're trying to protect the investor. It seems backwards to me, though, because what you should be trying to protect is the business. And what's the best way to protect the business? It's to ensure that the sweat equity person is properly incentivized, right? And so a lot of times, you know, the preferred return will be slightly tilted in the favor of the investor, and then the sweat equity person or the founder or whatever you want to refer to them as in this fictional scenario, you know, they'll have compensation and this and that. So what I did was I said, let's turn this on its head, this idea of the preferred return, and give the preferred return to the founder and structure compensation and equity and return for this venture to be centered around the idea that the founder can get to a point where he can put a roof over his head and his family's head and make a decent wage. And that is putting the preferred return in his favor as opposed to mine. Now, where it gets interesting is that after he's had his preferred return and the business reaches a certain scale, it flips to be in my favor. So I'm taking a lot of the risk off the table for the founder and taking a lot of the front end risk for myself in order to get that person to a point where they're whole and they're making a good living. And then once they're set up and they've got the ability to, you know, not have to worry about their, you know, paycheck to paycheck, then it flips into my favor. So milestone one applied to that is basically saying, you know what, instead of protecting the investor who isn't going to lose the roof over his head, let's protect the founder who's taken a lot more risk and maybe does have a roof over his or her head that they're likely to lose or have lost or don't have yet, you know, because they're earlier in their career or whatever. And they're trying to build something, you know, that's a good, sustainable business. Now, I'm obviously not an investor who's trying to, you know, scale a massive operation, create a unicorn. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, you know, help somebody build small businesses that can employ, you know, a few people, a few dozen people, or whatever. And you know, that's coming from my worldview and the area that I play in and that I'm comfortable in. So that's kind of the backstory was this idea of let's create a new model for investment that puts the founder's interests first, but maybe gives the investor a big reward in the end as well. And you know, it's just a way of looking at it from a different angle. But I think what it does is it increases the odds that the business is going to succeed because the person working the business gets to a point where the business is taking care of them quicker, right?
You know what's interesting is I I often find this. I live in southeastern Virginia. Here in Memphis, not both not like the most business savvy places in the world, but what I find is that a lot of times the investors are people who have never even owned a business, so they don't even know the struggles that these people are going through. And so I like that you have this concept that's like, oh, let's just make sure this person can actually eat too, instead of just get me a 5 million times return.
Yeah, I mean the the, the backstory is the guy that I was working with, and the first time I did this, um, had lost his job, and he knew how to run a certain type of business. Um, but he had lost the roof over his head, and I was like, look, you know what to do. You just need a little capital, so let's give you that, and let's get a roof over your head and take care of your family first. Um, and once your family's taken care of, then we'll worry about me. But I saw a great opportunity for myself, and I saw a good opportunity to let somebody do his thing. Now it's that whole journey has been a learning experience and full of twists and turns. So of course it didn't turn out the way anybody expected it would. But we got a good business that's generating cash, and now we're trying to turn the corner, make it profitable, and trying to make sure that he's incentivized long term to run this thing, because I think he'd be a great CEO to run this company, and can really provide very well for his family with it. And it'll be good for me too. Um, there's a lot of, Memphis is a big trust fund town, and a lot of investors are, come from that background where maybe their parents or their grandparents were successful and savvy in business, but they haven't had any practical experience running their own companies other than these funds, and that's the company they run, I guess. So they're more like freelancers than they are business owners, and that's a different thing altogether.
What do you think about advice in general? Where should people, from a business perspective, be getting their advice? Should it be from people who have done it before, or that have experience in it and are just a little bit above them? Kind of like, who, if you're seeking advice, who should you be seeking that advice from?
First of all, it's got to be someone who you genuinely trust, someone who's willing to talk about their mistakes. Not just share the insights from their mistakes, but actually to share the concrete details and the struggle and what really happened. I think those people who are willing to share that information are the best people to get advice from. Not people who just want to be vulnerable because they like, getting, people's sympathy, but people that are like, no, I'm telling you this so that you'll know, right? But at the end of the day, no matter how many people tell you, I don't know what it's going to be like to start your own company or what it's going to be like to have your first kid, you don't know what it's really like until it happens to you. So no matter how much you know it up here in your head, you're not really going to feel it in your heart until it happens to you. And I think getting with people who can get you as close to that as possible, who you really believe and trust, and who will share that stuff, are going to keep you furthest away from making some of those same mistakes.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a part in Milestone 1 that talks about cities giving money towards incubators, and the businesses that are coming out of those aren't what they expected. Why are cities so bad, basically everywhere in the world, at trying to incubate businesses?
Well, you got to, I think, look at the reason they're doing it in the first place. So there's a lot of sound economic theory behind the idea of investing in small businesses. The problem is investing in small businesses and giving $25,000 to a kid who's straight out of school, who went to a code school, or doesn't even know how to code but wants to build a cool app, isn't the same thing as investing in a small business. So the difference is a couple of things. Number one, a small business is interested in generating cash flow and making a profit week to week, month to month, and year to year. A startup isn't necessarily interested in that. They're interested in an exit. Here's another thing. Software companies and things like that are notorious for not really employing a bunch of people, right? I'm looking at a deal, and it's confidential, but it's generating $1 million a year in revenue. It's kicking off $650,000 a year in profit. It employs 2 people. $1 million business employing 2 people plus the owner, right? It's keeping 3 people gainfully employed. Think about that for a minute. Compare that to an auto body shop doing $1 million a year that can employ 15 people, right? Startups just don't employ people to the same scale as other businesses, at least not to the scale that these, B-list cities, not the big tech hubs, are attracting these people. And so, you get a couple of founders who are smart, energetic, motivated, articulate, and may or may not work out in business, as entrepreneurs. And what you end up doing is giving them a good experience, but not really creating any jobs out of it. And a lot of reason that cities get into it is because other cities are doing it, so we've got to do it to stay competitive, right? If you're going to do it from an economic development perspective and focus on businesses that make sense for your economy. In Memphis, logistics. We've got FedEx in the hub here, right? We've got some biotech. Stay focused on those areas, right? Don't try and start the next Uber here.
Yep.
What does Norfolk got going for it?
Well, I make that same point, right? Where it's like, what are you best at? And try and make those things better. But instead, this area wants to do things that have nothing to do with it. They want to create cybersecurity because it's a huge market. Well, cybersecurity isn't going to be here. And they get mad at me because I'm like, hey, why are you trying to do this? Or you're trying to help 4 companies when you could be helping 1,000 companies. Let's do things that are going to help the majority of these people, get more jobs. And so I had this idea that instead of whale hunting, which in some cases is giving, $10,000 to $30,000 per job, what if you gave that $10,000 to $30,000 incentives to the next 1,000 businesses? Well, it doesn't work that way. Why?
Well,
Why
you go brim fishing instead, right? I would much rather see, and I'm dead serious, cities like Norfolk and Memphis, take half of what we're investing in a startup community, right? And go to those streets in the parts of town that these startup founders don't come from, and find the restaurants and the auto mechanics and even go to some of the churches, because they're going to know where the entrepreneurial and smart people are at. They're going to be tied into the community. Talk to the colonels in the police precincts and find out who are the community leaders in the different parts of your city, and figure out where best to deploy these funds to the small business owners, the tailors, the whoever, who want to create jobs, who don't want to create startups.
And want to be in that city because that's why they're there.
I took a tour around Memphis with a colonel in one of the police precincts in a pretty tough part of town, and he introduced me to a lot of the community leaders and the neighborhood leaders. And what struck me, first of all, was that everybody had their own NFL team, from different parts of the country. I was like, oh, that's cool. Everybody's got their own team. And then it hit me. That's because they're from those other cities. There's this guy from New Orleans who moved to Memphis and chose to live in this neighborhood to help out these people who he knows are good and smart and hardworking and just need some help. And he's there to help them. Find that guy, give him $50,000, right? So that he can give 25 to the tailor that's leasing an office from his church, and another 25,000 to the barber school that gives barber lessons, because that's a licensed trade, and it's too expensive to go through, proper barber school. And so they've got this organization that helps teach, and get your certifications for cheaper. Give it to these people who are actually creating jobs.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's just not sexy, right? That's not sexy. But if they do this big thing and they get this new company in town, they can check this mark and say, "Hey, look, this is what we did. We did another ribbon. We incentivized these people. All these people are moving here now." And I don't know. I don't get it.
So
I'm never going to get it.
I think technology is going to be a part of businesses that get started these days. That's a given, right? Like, so it makes sense, right? But like the idea that you're going to attract the next high growth startup to your city eventually is great. It eventually will happen sometime in the next 10 years. But like a Grand Slam would be a company that employs 40 or 50 people in the next 10 years, right? And you're going to have a dozen that employ 5 or 10, and you've employed 100 people. Well, golly, that's so much easier to do other ways.
So I don't know if you know this, but you're on the 1004 show. The numbers mean something. So, of course you know because you're on it. But so like I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was at a economic development job summit, and someone was like, "Oh, the only thing that this area needs is to recruit 4 large businesses with 1,000 employees each." And I got so fed up, I said, "What if we just helped 1,000 businesses get to 4 employees? It's the same amount of numbers, and it's a lot more diverse." And it is amazing to me how many people in those leadership roles hate the concept. Not just in my area, but everywhere.
Look, I'm reading an economic development textbook that my wife gave me. She's an economist, and she's worked in economic development. And I'm reading this because I just want to learn about this. And what you should try, here's what you should do. You should tell them, okay, let's get 2 companies with 1,000 employees, and 500 companies with 4 employees, and you get to 4,000, right? Because that's actually how the world works. If you must know, is that you need both, right? And the other thing to think about
it's the anchor effect. If you think about it, the shopping mall, right? They have anchor tenants. People, those 2 to 4 anchor tenants are there. Those would be your big businesses, right? And then it's a bunch of small businesses in between, and they feed off each other.
Well, all right. So think about neighborhoods. So Memphis is a pretty big city. And think about neighborhoods in Memphis that aren't going to attract 1,000 employee company. Like they're on islands. Like, what are they going to do? Well, the only answer is small business. Entrepreneurs, people who live in the neighborhood, setting up shop and employing 2, 3, 4 people. And then think about communities that aren't in big cities that are rural, right? You go 100 miles outside of Memphis, you're not going to get 1,000 person employee to come save that community. So what you've got to do is you've got to figure out ways to get with the people in those towns and get them what they need to start businesses.
Yep. What's something about you that most people don't know about?
I repoed cars when I was in college, but I told you that earlier. That was one of my jobs. I think that I write poetry, or have that background at least, that I'm a writer.
If someone is thinking about maybe redesigning their website or starting a business that needs a website, what's kind of the best practices that they could get started with before they would call a company like yours?
That's a good question. How do you have your house in order before you hire the professionals? I think that one of the things you need to do is lay out and articulate what your goals need to be. Why are you investing? And it goes back to the questions that I ask everybody. Why do you want to do what you want to do? And why are you doing what you're currently doing, right? With the answers to those questions laid out and articulated clearly, any professional agency is going to have a lot of good stuff to work with.
Good stuff. What's something that you thought I would ask you that I haven't?
You didn't send any prep over, so I was like, this is going to be good. This is going to be less formulaic, a little bit more conversation. This will be good. I thought you might ask me about buying apps because I get asked that a lot.
I try and ask questions that people don't ask.
Yeah, that's good.
And I don't like to tell people what I'm going to ask beforehand because then it's scripted, right? And I don't want to be scripted. And I think I sent this to you, but maybe I didn't. I give them a general, like, these are the things that we could go into, right? But I've done interviews where it's like, here's the list of questions that I'm going to ask you. And after the third question, I'm going to ask you the fourth thing. Like, and some people are like, well, that's what I want out of a podcast. I'm like, cool. Well, I think this is a different type of experience, and we're not going to ask the same questions every time because who wants to listen to the same thing over and over again?
I actually got on a podcast with a guy one time who asked me a question, and I responded that that's a really challenging question, and I'm not sure I know the answer to it. And he said, well, you had the questions in advance, and that was on the podcast. And I was like, doesn't change the fact that I don't know the answer to this question.
That's funny.
Know, but yeah, it was pretty funny.
So is that like the worst question you've ever been asked?
No, I think you pretty much asked me the worst question I've ever been asked earlier.
That was the one about, does everyone need an app?
Does everybody need an app?
Yeah.
No.
Well, I believe that. I asked it because I wanted to get that answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Well, I don't think everyone needs an app. I think that people that keep saying, oh, I need to get this app, I'm like, and I like your answer to it, articulate your goals beforehand. People can't even figure out that. So.
Yeah. Well, I think I think people who can't articulate why aren't spending the time or maybe don't have the capacity to think critically. If you can't find the time or you don't have the ability to think critically, you're going to have a tough time succeeding